Real love is often misunderstood because it doesn't arrive loudly or dramatically. It doesn't always come with grand gestures or constant intensity. Instead, it shows up quietly in moments that are easy to overlook. This is when a man stops performing and starts revealing, when he no longer feels the need to impress you, but instead feels the need to protect the connection. Real love begins when he feels emotionally safe enough to be honest, even about his fears, doubts, and imperfections. It's the moment he becomes consistent, not because he has to, but because he wants to. He starts thinking beyond the present and naturally includes you in his future decisions. Your feelings begin to matter to him as much as his own, and your happiness no longer feels optional. This is when love becomes real, not exciting for a moment, but meaningful for a lifetime. Real love begins when a man feels emotionally safe enough to be fully himself, and this is one of the most misunderstood stages of connection. Many people assume love is proven through intensity, constant attention, or dramatic effort. In reality, those behaviors often come from uncertainty or the desire to win approval. Emotional safety, however, comes from trust. It is the moment a man no longer feels he has to curate a version of himself to be accepted. Instead of showing only confidence, strength, or charm, he allows vulnerability to exist without fear of judgment. When a man feels emotionally safe, he stops guarding his words. He shares thoughts he would normally keep to himself, not because he is trying to be deep, but because he feels understood. This might show up as admitting confusion about his future, expressing fears about failure, or revealing emotional experiences from his past. These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of connection. Emotional safety tells him that being honest will not cost him respect or affection. This is also when communication changes in quality. Rather than avoiding difficult conversations, he leans into them. Disagreements become less about winning and more about resolving. He listens more carefully, not to respond, but to understand. This shift happens because he believes the relationship can handle truth. Real love grows in environments where honesty is met with empathy rather than punishment. Another key sign of emotional safety is consistency in behavior. When a man feels safe, his actions align with his words because he no longer feels internal pressure to impress or escape. He shows up the same way across different situations, whether things are calm or challenging. This stability is not boredom, it is emotional security. It reflects a nervous system that feels regulated within the connection. Emotional safety is not created by perfection. It is created by acceptance with boundaries. A man feels safe when he knows he can make mistakes, learn, and grow without being shamed or abandoned. This does not mean tolerating poor behavior, but it does mean addressing issues with clarity instead of criticism. Safety grows when accountability exists alongside compassion. When emotional safety is present, a man's attachment deepens naturally. He does not feel the need to pull away to regain control or independence, because the relationship does not threaten his identity. Instead, he feels expanded by it. Love becomes less about excitement, more about peace, trust, and mutual understanding. This is why emotional safety is the foundation of real love. Without it, attraction may exist, but depth cannot. When a man feels safe enough to be fully himself, love stops being something he is chasing and starts being something he is choosing every day, consciously and with sincerity. A man feels real love when consistency matters more to him than excitement alone. And this shift is one of the clearest indicators that his feelings have deepened. In the early stages of attraction, excitement often drives behavior. There is anticipation, unpredictability, and emotional highs that come from novelty. While this phase can feel intense, it is also unstable. A man may show up strongly one moment and disappear the next, not because he lacks interest, but because his emotions are still tied to stimulation rather than commitment. When real love begins, his priorities change. He no longer seeks the rush of uncertainty. He values the reassurance of reliability. Consistency becomes attractive because it creates emotional grounding. He starts caring less about how dramatic the connection feels and more about how dependable it is. This is when his presence becomes steady. Calls are returned, plans are followed through, and words align with actions. Not because he is forcing discipline, but because consistency now feels meaningful to him. This shift happens when a man realizes that real connection is built over time, not in emotional spikes. He understands that excitement fades, but trust compounds. Consistency becomes the way he protects what matters. He begins to show up even when life is busy, stressful, or inconvenient, because the relationship has moved from being an option to being a priority. This is not about obligation, it is about choice. Another important change is emotional regulation. When consistency matters more than excitement, he stops creating or engaging in unnecessary drama. He doesn't pull away to test your reaction or create tension to feel desired. Instead, he communicates more clearly and directly. Stability no longer feels boring, it feels safe. He recognizes that emotional chaos is not a sign of passion, but of insecurity. Consistency also reflects long-term thinking. A man in real love understands that his actions today shape trust tomorrow. He becomes mindful of how inconsistency can create anxiety and distance. As a result, LT, he becomes more intentional. He checks in, follows routines that support the relationship, and becomes predictable in the best possible way. Predictability here means emotional reliability, not loss of romance. Consistency does not eliminate excitement, it transforms it. The thrill no longer comes from uncertainty, but from growth, shared experiences, and emotional closeness. He finds satisfaction in building something stable rather than chasing fleeting validation. This is when love matures from feeling-based attraction into value-based commitment. When a man chooses consistency over excitement, it shows he is no longer motivated by impulse. He is motivated by care, respect, and emotional investment. This is real love in action, quiet, steady, and deeply intentional. Emotional investment grows when a man starts considering your needs as equal to his own, and this marks a powerful transition from attraction to real love. In the early stages of connection, a man may care about you, but his decisions are still largely centered around his personal comfort, schedule, and desires. This isn't selfishness, it's simply how attraction works before emotional attachment deepens. Love begins when this balance shifts and your experience becomes part of his internal decision-making process. When a man feels real love, he no longer views your needs as separate from his life. He starts asking himself how his actions will affect you, not because he's trying to avoid conflict, but because your emotional well-being genuinely matters to him. This can show up in small but meaningful ways, such as adjusting his plans to support you, being more present when you're overwhelmed, or thinking ahead to prevent situations that might hurt you. These behaviors reflect internal consideration, not external pressure. This stage is also where empathy becomes consistent. He doesn't just listen when it's convenient or when emotions are high. He makes space for your feelings even when he doesn't fully understand them yet. Instead of dismissing or minimizing your concerns, he becomes curious. He asks questions, seeks clarity, and wants to understand your perspective. This willingness to emotionally engage signals that he sees you as a partner, not just a part of his life. Considering your needs equally also changes how he handles conflict. Rather than defending himself automatically, he starts looking for resolution that works for both of you. Winning an argument becomes less important than preserving trust. He becomes more open to compromise, not because he feels he's losing something, but because the relationship itself has become something he wants to protect. Your happiness and emotional security now hold weight in his choices. Another key shift is responsibility. When real love is present, he doesn't see your emotional needs as a burden. He recognizes that being in a relationship means being emotionally available and responsive. This does not mean sacrificing himself or ignoring his own boundaries. Instead, it means understanding that healthy love requires mutual care. He shows up not only when things are easy, but also when support is required. Over time, this equal consideration creates emotional intimacy. You feel seen, valued, and prioritized, which strengthens trust and connection. For him, love deepens because he experiences fulfillment in contributing to your happiness. This mutual investment creates a cycle where care reinforces closeness. When a man begins to weigh your needs alongside his own, love becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a shared responsibility, built on respect, empathy, and intentional choice. Real love appears when a man chooses long-term connection over short-term validation, and this choice reflects a deep internal shift in how he experiences relationships. Short-term validation is driven by ego. It comes from feeling wanted, admired, or desired in the moment. While this can feel exciting, it is also fragile. A man who is still seeking validation is often focused on how the relationship makes him feel right now, rather than what it is becoming over time. When real love develops, his motivation changes. He no longer seeks attention simply to reassure himself of his worth. Instead, he values emotional depth, trust, and continuity. He starts thinking beyond immediate gratification and considers the long-term impact of his actions. This means he becomes less interested in flirting for reassurance, testing boundaries, or keeping options open. The desire to feel chosen is replaced by the desire to build something meaningful. This shift shows up clearly in his behavior. He becomes more intentional with his words and actions because he understands that trust is built slowly and can be damaged quickly. He avoids behaviors that might create insecurity or confusion, even if they could boost his ego temporarily. Choosing long-term connection means he is willing to delay pleasure, reassurance, or excitement if it protects emotional safety and stability. Another important sign is restraint. A man who values long-term connection doesn't need constant affirmation from others. He is less reactive to external attention because his emotional focus is grounded. This doesn't mean attraction to others disappears, but it no longer controls his choices. His loyalty becomes a reflection of self-respect and commitment, not obligation. This stage also reflects emotional maturity. He understands love is not about being constantly stimulated, but about being consistently present. He recognizes that real intimacy requires patience, effort, and sometimes discomfort. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations or emotional responsibility, he engages with them, knowing they strengthen the bond over time. Choosing long-term connection also means accepting uncertainty with intention. He understands that relationships evolve and face challenges, but he is willing to stay engaged rather than and escape when things feel less exciting. This willingness to remain emotionally invested during calm or difficult periods is a powerful indicator of real love. When a man chooses long-term connection over short-term validation, he is choosing depth over distraction. Love becomes something he builds, protects, and grows, rather than something he uses to feel temporarily fulfilled. This is where love shifts from desire to devotion, grounded in purpose, rather than impulse. A man feels real love when your happiness becomes part of his personal responsibility. And this is one of the deepest indicators that his emotional commitment is genuine. In the early stages of attraction, a man may enjoy making you happy, but it is often situational. He responds when it's easy, when the mood is good, or when the relationship feels light. Real love begins when your emotional well-being is no longer optional or occasional, but something he actively considers in how he lives, chooses, and shows up. This does not mean he takes responsibility for fixing your emotions or carrying your entire emotional world. Healthy love is not about rescuing or self-sacrifice. Instead, it means he recognizes that his actions have emotional impact, and he cares deeply about that impact. He becomes mindful of how his words, behavior, and presence affect your sense of safety, confidence, and peace. This awareness reflects emotional maturity, not control. When your happiness matters to him, his effort becomes proactive rather than reactive. He doesn't wait for problems to escalate before responding. He checks in, notices changes in your energy, and asks how you're doing without being prompted. He wants to understand what supports you emotionally, because supporting you feels meaningful to him. This effort is not driven by fear of losing you, but by a desire to nurture the connection. This stage also changes how he handles mistakes. When he hurts you, intentionally or not, he doesn't become defensive or dismissive. Instead, he feels accountable. He wants to repair, not avoid. He listens to understand rather than to justify himself. This willingness to take responsibility shows that your emotional experience matters as much as his pride. Love deepens when accountability replaces avoidance. Another important shift is protection. When a man feels real love, he naturally wants to protect your emotional space. He avoids behaviors that create unnecessary anxiety, such as inconsistency, secrecy, or emotional withdrawal. He understands that trust is fragile and treats it with care. This doesn't mean he becomes perfect, but it does mean he becomes intentional. This shared responsibility creates emotional security. You feel supported, valued, and considered, which allows you to relax into the relationship. For him, love becomes fulfilling because contributing to your happiness brings meaning to his own life. This mutual care strengthens the bond and deepens intimacy. When a man sees your happiness as part of his responsibility, love stops being about personal fulfillment alone. It becomes a partnership rooted in care, respect, and conscious choice. Real love is not something that arrives all at once, and it is rarely announced through dramatic moments. It reveals itself through quiet, consistent shifts in how a man thinks, feels, and behaves. When he feels emotionally safe enough to be himself, chooses consistency over excitement, considers your needs as equal to his own, values long-term connection over short-term validation, and takes responsibility for your happiness with care and maturity. Love moves from theory into action. These changes are not about perfection, pressure, or performance. They are about intention, presence, and emotional growth. Real love feels steady, grounded, and protective rather than confusing or unstable. It creates peace instead of anxiety and clarity instead of doubt. When love is real, it doesn't make you question where you stand. It shows up through reliability, empathy, and conscious choice. That is how you recognize love that is not just felt, but lived every day in ways that truly matter.